My fellow Americans, I'm not reading these notes. What's up, my little freaklings? Back at it with another episode of the Mog. And by Mog, I mean pod. Because we're mogging all the other pods. My name is Franklin D. Roosevelt. I am a former president of America. And today, I will be doing my last fireside chat. Father Freak recently revived me and pleaded with me to give one last fireside chat. I obliged. Here are some terms that I am meant to go over in this fireside chat. It is a broad overview, to say the least, but it will have to do. So we shall jump in. Black Tuesday. Many people will recognize this as the day that the U.S. stock market crashed. The date was October 29, and it marked the beginning of the Great Depression. However, I would like to once again remind my fellow Americans that this was not the cause. This was simply the sign. The Depression was beginning. Moving on to the Great Depression, it was a worldwide economic collapse that was caused by overproduction and financial speculation. It affected the U.S. from October until the date that we began our involvement in World War II. So there we go. The Smoot-Hawley Act. This was a tariff that raised taxes on imported agriculture, and it was during the beginning of the Great Depression. Other countries also increased their duties on our American goods, and this ultimately caused a decline in our global trade. A truly terrible thing that did not benefit us very much. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation. This corporation was endorsed by Herbert Hoover, the 31st president, my predecessor. It provided federal support through loans to troubled banks, railroads, and other insurance companies, and was later offered to states and municipalities as an attempt to stimulate the economic growth and job creation. It ultimately was not very effective, as I was able to swoop in and save our country from economic collapse. The Dust Bowl. Now, this is a truly unfortunate situation, as it was in the middle of the U.S., the Southern Plains, and the area experienced devastating dust storms. It was quite a catastrophe, as the soil would fly about in great winds, and farmers were unable to function, so it was not good. Scottsboro 9. This is a truly dark time in our country, as it involved 9 black youths who were convicted of raping 2 white women in Scottsboro, in Alabama. Their death penalties were later overturned, and this drew national and international attention, and it brought eyes to the racial inequalities and disparities in America. So it is a truly, truly terrible, truly sad situation. However, it brought eyes to a devastating thing that needed attention. The Bonus Army. These were veterans of World War I, the Great War, and they wanted immediate payment of their service bonuses. They were supposed to receive them in 1950. However, they wanted to get their receivement accelerated, and so they decided to try to negotiate with President Hoover. However, he refused and sent the U.S. Army on them, and it led to a violent clash, which brought a lot of eyes and distaste for Herbert Hoover. And so I ultimately was able to come in and take place. The New Deal. Now, this is very important. Please pay attention, as I was able to do this to bring change in America to help us lessen the effects of the Great Depression. It's still maintained its presence, however, I was able to do very much for us. So the New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, initiated policies to combat the Great Depression. It was a dramatic expansion of the role of the government as the government got more involved, as Hoover wanted to have a more laissez-faire idea on how the government would be involved with people and believed that the economy would right itself, but I knew this was not the case and people were dying. It didn't matter how things would work out in the long run. What mattered is that people ate every day. So the emergency banking system. This was an act passed in 1933 with the goal of stabilizing the banking system, and it calmed widespread public panic. The act required banks to pass an audit, and they had to complete this before reopening after the bank holiday. This was actually what my first fireside chat was about. So I think that's quite important, as it marked the beginning of my policies, the beginning of my fireside chats, the beginning of my assistance to America. So the Glass-Steagall Act. This was a New Deal legislation passed in 1933, and it was meant to reform and strengthen our banking system. This created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it was meant to insure bank deposits. It also prohibited institutions from participating in commercial and investment banking. However, it is noted here that this was repealed in 1999, so it's good to see that New Deal policies became less important as time went on, as we escaped a depression. So, the 21st Amendment now. Many people will recognize this one, as it repealed the 18th Amendment, also known as Prohibition. Many people were happy, as Prohibition ultimately caused more sin and more chaos. So that is good. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA. This was also New Deal Act that was also passed in 1933, and it raised the price for farm produce, as we paid the farmers for not producing food because they were producing simply too much food and no one could afford the food, and made them poorer, and it made the people poorer and was ultimately not good. But it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1936. So the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. So this was also a New Deal agency, and it brought low-cost electricity to rural Americans, and it aimed to redevelop the Tennessee River Valley through flood control projects. The agency built and owned and supervised a number of power plants and dams, and this was enacted so that we might be able to have more people have access to electricity, and also built dams. So, the Public Works Administration, or the PWA. This was a New Deal administration, also created in 1933, and it provided job reliefs as we employed people to construct infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals, dams, and libraries. It was a bit of a public service and allowed people to earn money to support their families. Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. This was a New Deal work program, and it hired young, unmarried men to work on conservation projects. It ultimately employed 2.5 million men, and it lasted until 1942. So yeah. The Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. So this is a New Deal agency that was established in 1935, and it put unemployed Americans to work on public projects ranging from construction to the arts. So there's a difference there. This one involved the arts, and the previous civilian conservation corps employed only people to build, and this one employed people to also produce art. But this involved more than 8 million people, so increased amount of who was involved. Quite useful. The Social Security Act, this landmark of the 1935 Act. It created retirement pensions for most Americans, and it was funded by payroll taxes. It also provided unemployment insurance and assistance for the disabled. Very important, as I myself identify with the disabled, as I had polio and now struggle to walk. I have crutches, I use canes, wheelchairs, but ultimately it was quite devastating and looked down upon, as I often found myself photographing myself in ways that made it difficult to notice these things. It was difficult to be disabled, and I'm so thankful that I was able to experience presidency. So yes. The National Labor Relations Act. This act was also known as the Wagner Act. It was founded in 1935, and it created the National Labor Relations Board, or also known as the NLRB. The NLRB protected workers' rights to organize labor unions without business owners interfering and engaging in collective bargaining. It gave the power back to the people. But yeah, so the Indian Reorganization Act. This was an act from 1934, and it ended the Dawes Act, and it authorized self-government for those living on reservations, extended tribal landholdings, and it pledged to uphold native customs. So this was giving the natives that lived in America their freedom back. So a court packing plan. I proposed this in 1937 to increase the number of members of the U.S. Supreme Court, and I wanted to reduce its opposition to the New Deal legislation, as I was feeling conservative pushback from this as well as liberal pushback, as both sides found fault. But I was ultimately unable to succeed in this, and it uprooted my popular support. So truly an unfortunate situation. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC. So this was created during the New Deal in 1933, and it insured bank deposits to restore public confidence, as many people did not believe in their banking system. Many people, one way to see this referenced in popular culture is, I believe, it's A Wonderful Life, where we saw people racing to get their money, and this act was put into place to combat that racing to the banks, as we closed the banks and made them forced to go through an audit. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, this was established in 1934, and it regulated the stock market and protected investors by ensuring fair, transparent financial practices, and its aim was to prevent fraud. So then we have the National Recovery Administration, or the NRA. So this was established in 1933, and it was aimed to stimulate the industry by settling the fair wages, the prices, and the working conditions, and it promoted economic recovery, and it reduced unemployment, which was a huge issue. Then we have the Civil Works Administration, or the CWA. This was also created in 1933, and it provided temporary jobs in public work projects, such as building roads and schools, to combat unemployment during the Great Depression. This was the main vehicle that we used to prevent unemployment, as we had many things built, and ended up being a public service as well as helping people get jobs. Frances Perkins. Now, she was the first female U.S. cabinet member, and she served as a Secretary of Labor. She was a key role in crafting New Deal programs, and she was involved in the Social Security Act and the labor protections for the workers. Huey Long. He was a controversial Louisiana governor, and he was opposed to parts of My New Deal, and he advocated instead for his Share Our Wealth program, which proposed wealth redistribution and guaranteed income for Americans. So he also believed in getting involved, however, he didn't believe in every single aspect of the New Deal. Father Charles Coughlin. He was a Catholic priest and a radio host. He initially supported the New Deal, but he later criticized it for not doing enough. He advocated for wealth distribution and nationalizing banks through his own movement. This occurred a long time ago. Father Freak resurrected me from the dead, and with that, I have some foggy memories, but I do have a faint memory of Father Charles. All right. Herbert Hoover. Now, I've already mentioned him, but he was the 31st U.S. president, and he was opposed to the New Deal policies. He believed in a limited government intervention, laissez-faire. His handling of the Great Depression led to widespread criticism, and he paved the way for my reform efforts. So, I don't agree with him, but I am thankful that he was able, his his unpopularity allowed room for my for my success. Then the last important term to cover is Franklin D. Roosevelt, myself. As president, I was able to initiate the New Deal to combat the Great Depression. I implemented various reforms like Social Security, banking regulations, and public work programs, and I provided relief, recovery, and reform. My 3 big R's. Anyway, that's all I've been instructed to cover. Thank you, Father Freak, for resurrecting me and allowing me to have one last hurrah, one last fireside chat. It's not quite what it was, but it is nice to know when your last fireside chat is your last one. So, I thank all of you for listening in, and I pray that we will not have to suffer through this again, that we will not have to rely on a global war to pull us out of economic instability, that we will not have to rely on global instability to escape our money problems. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Father Freak, again. And I'm not reading. Stay freaky.